I remember the day I moved into the neighborhood. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a small but cozy house on a quiet street, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and looks out for one another. Or so I thought. My neighbor, Mr. Thompson, was an older man, living alone. He seemed friendly enough at first, always greeting me with a warm smile whenever I saw him. But things started to get weird not long after I settled in. It began with small, unannounced visits. Mr. Thompson would knock on my door at odd hours, making up flimsy excuses to come inside. "Just checking if you need any help with the plumbing," he'd say. Or, "I thought I saw a leak in your roof from my window." His reasons always seemed a bit off, but I brushed it off as neighborly concern. As days passed, his behavior became more and more unsettling. I'd catch him staring at my house from his window, his gaze lingering a little too long to be considered normal. I tried to convince myself that he was just a lonely old man, looking for some form of human connection. But deep down, I felt uneasy. Then, one evening, I came home to find him inside my house. He had let himself in, claiming he heard a strange noise and thought I might be in trouble. I hadn't given him a key and all the doors had been locked. The realization that he had found a way to break in sent shivers down my spine. I started to notice other strange occurrences. Items would be slightly out of place, as if someone had been sifting through my belongings. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but then I found a photograph of myself that I had never taken. It was a candid shot, taken from a distance, with me clearly unaware of the camera. The photo was tucked inside a book on my shelf, a place Mr. Thompson could have easily accessed during one of his uninvited visits. I decided to confront him. His reaction was chilling. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smiled in a way that made my stomach turn. "I like to keep an eye on my neighbors," he said, "just to make sure they're safe." But his tone and the look in his eyes told a different story. It wasn't concern I saw there. It was an obsession. I'd see shadows move past my windows late at night, and there were times when I could swear I heard someone tampering with the doors, trying to find a way in. The final straw came one night when I was awoken by the sound of someone whispering my name through a slightly open window. Terrified, I called the police, but by the time they arrived, Mr. Thompson was back in his own house, acting as if nothing had happened. The police said there wasn't much they could do without solid evidence of a crime. I couldn't take it anymore. The house that was supposed to be my sanctuary had become a prison, and my neighbor, the warden. I decided to move out, leaving behind the eerie presence of Mr. Thompson and his unsettling obsession. Even now, in my new home, far away from that quiet street, I sometimes catch myself looking over my shoulder, wondering if I'm truly alone.
I remember that night like it was yesterday. I was just a shy 14-year-old girl trying to navigate life in a new city. My family had moved there because of my dad's job. A better position with a good salary, they said. Our new home was a cozy 2-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood. Most of our neighbors were friendly, except for Mr. Dobson. Mr. Dobson was about 40, lived alone next door, and always seemed a bit too interested in me. He'd flash a smile whenever he saw me, trying to strike up conversations and showering me with compliments. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude. One Saturday evening, my parents went out for some event. I wasn't feeling up to going, so I decided to stay home and watch YouTube videos instead. They told me they might be late, and it was okay for me to head to bed if they weren't back in time. It wasn't long after they left that I heard a knock on the door. I approached cautiously and asked who it was. When Mr. Dobson's voice answered, my heart skipped a beat. Why would he be here so late? I told him my parents weren't home, but instead of leaving, he insisted on coming in to chat. I politely declined, but he grew more persistent, saying he just wanted to get to know me better and promising he wouldn't do anything bad. I didn't know what to do. He started banging on the door and fear clenched my stomach. I screamed that I would call my parents, and the banging stopped. But then I heard footsteps outside, and I realized he was walking around the house, peering into the windows, trying to find me. I grabbed my phone and called my dad, my voice trembling with fear. He promised to come home as fast as he could. By the time my parents returned, Mr. Dobson was gone. My dad went to his house, but no one answered the door. The next day he tried again, but Mr. Dobson denied everything. That's when we decided to install surveillance cameras for our safety. Thankfully, nothing else strange happened after that night. But the memory of Mr. Dobson's visit lingered, casting a shadow over our once peaceful home. 2 months later, Mr. Dobson suddenly moved out, and we never saw him again. It was a relief, but also unsettling. What had he wanted that night? And why had he been so insistent on seeing me when my parents weren't home? I'll never forget the fear that gripped me that night, or the relief I felt when my dad finally came home. It taught me to always trust my instincts and never to ignore the warning signs, no matter how small they may seem. Now, whenever I hear a knock on the door late at night, my heart still skips a beat, and I can't help but wonder if it's Mr. Dobson or someone else, lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike.
A few years ago, I took a significant step in my life by moving into a small, charming apartment on the edge of town. It was my first foray into living alone, and the mix of excitement and nervous anticipation was palpable. The independence was exhilarating. But little did I know, my newfound freedom would soon turn into a harrowing ordeal that would haunt me for years to come. At first, everything seemed perfect. The apartment was cozy, the neighbors friendly, and the sense of peace was overwhelming. However, this serenity was short-lived. It began with an inexplicable feeling of being watched. Initially, I attributed this sensation to the typical jitters that come with living alone. I convinced myself it was all in my head, but as the days passed, this unsettling feeling persisted, growing stronger with each passing night. The first tangible sign that something was amiss occurred one quiet Friday evening. I was nestled on my couch, lost in the latest episodes of my favorite series, when an unusual noise pierced the silence. A faint scraping sound, reminiscent of someone dragging their feet through the gravel just outside my window. My heart skipped a beat as I paused the show, straining my ears against the silence that followed. I rationalized it could be anything, a stray animal, perhaps, or a late-night passerby. Yet, the seed of unease had been planted, and it refused to be ignored. This was just the beginning. Night after night, the sounds grew more pronounced. A soft tapping on the window here, a subtle shuffling there. Each incident sent waves of fear through my body, compelling me to peek through the curtains, though I never caught sight of anyone. The more it happened, the more my imagination ran wild, painting vivid pictures of unseen watchers lurking in the darkness. The situation escalated terrifyingly when I discovered a note slipped under my door one evening. The message was simple, but its implications were terrifying. "I'm watching you." The words were scrawled in a hurried, almost manic handwriting that sent shivers down my spine. The realization that someone had been physically at my door, invading my personal space, filled me with a dread I had never known. I was no longer safe in my own home. I reported the incident to the police the very next day. But without any concrete evidence or a clear suspect, their hands were tied. They advised me to stay vigilant and keep my doors locked, a suggestion that did little to ease my growing anxiety. Feeling vulnerable and exposed, my once comforting home now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on me with each passing day. The notes continued to arrive, each more menacing than the last. "I know when you're alone," one threatened. "You can't hide from me," taunted another. My life became a living nightmare. Paranoia took root, making me jump at every shadow, every unexpected noise. The fear of being watched consumed me, eroding my sense of security until I felt utterly trapped. In a desperate bid for peace of mind, I installed a security camera outside my front door. What it captured chilled me to the bone. A hooded figure, lurking in the shadows of the night, unmistakably watching my apartment. The sight of this shadowy stalker, even through the digital screen, was enough to send me into a state of panic. Armed with this evidence, the police finally had what they needed to act. The following days were a blur of fear, anticipation, and sleepless nights spent away from the apartment, too terrified to return. The police surveillance paid off, and my stalker was apprehended, a neighbor from just a few doors down. It was someone I had seen around, exchanged polite greetings with, never once suspecting the darkness that lay beneath their benign exterior. He admitted to the stalking, the notes, and the late-night vigils outside my door. It was all a twisted game to him, driven by a perverse desire to instill fear and exert control.